So I'm going to just do a screen share, and before we go into doing any activities, I'm going to show you a couple of examples of record covers that for different reasons I think are really successful examples of cover design. So that should be a bit of a kind of a nice starting point, looking at a few inspirational materials before we start doing some work of our own. And I'm just doing the screen share. Okay. I think my screen is sharing now. So excellent, thanks. Right, so here is my first example of a cover design that I think is a really successful one. This is actually quite a recent design. It's from 2018, so 2 years old. It's by a graphic designer called Brandon Reich, who is one of the main people behind a design agency called Tension Division, and they also specialize very heavily in a design for record covers and band merchandise as their kind of business model. It's the cover for a record called Erase Me by Under Oath, and there's a few reasons I wanted to share this cover. Firstly, I think Brandon Reich is a really good graphic designer, and I just love the kind of aesthetic the aesthetic styles that he creates with his designs. But also, what's interesting about this cover is that it tells a personal story about the background of the band, as well as just kind of trying to look cool. So the band had actually broken up in, I think, 2013, and they reformed 5 years later. So this was the first record they put out after they'd reformed. So for them, it was kind of a rebirth, and actually the first tour that this band did after reforming, they actually called the Rebirth Tour. So they were very aware of this being a kind of something that they could turn into a bit of a brand for their new version of themselves, this reborn version of the band that was kind of different to what they were before. And before the band split up the first time round, they branded themselves as a Christian band because they were sort of promoting Christianity through their music. But when they reformed, for various kind of personal reasons between the band members, they decided that the band was no longer going to be a Christian band, at least not as the band itself. I think some members of the band may have still had their faith, and some may have not. But what's interesting is they kind of turned this personal story of the background of the band and their faith into an aesthetic for the cover of the new record. So you can see that they've chosen this very Christian piece of imagery, an angel here, but its head has basically been sort of knocked off. It's like a broken statue. So it kind of implies all these layers of potential meaning and backstory to the band's history in this sort of simple and iconic image. It's like a kind of maybe faith that has decayed, or maybe what the band once stood for is not quite what it stands for anymore, that kind of thing. So for that reason, I think this is a really interesting album cover that sort of hints at a backstory without kind of giving you too much information. So it makes you kind of intrigued to find out more about what's going on here. So my second example, this is another cover by Brandon Reich and Tension Division. The reason I'm showing you two of these is just because he's a really influential, and I think one of the kind of top of the game sort of record cover designers in the here and now. So this is a cover that I'm sure some of you will already recognize. It's for Blurry Face, a record by 21 Pilots, which also only came out a couple of years ago or so. And this cover became really popular and iconic. What I quite like about what they've done with this one is the design of the cover isn't just an image printed onto the flat surface of a CD package or a vinyl sleeve. It's actually got several layers to it. So you can see, if you look at those circles with the kind of textured artwork and photography behind them, those are actually cut through the front layer of the cover, and there's another insert underneath. So this is a three-dimensional cover design that really kind of is aware and takes advantage of the physicality of the object. So it's the kind of design that you couldn't recreate in exactly the same way flat on a screen, and they've kind of tried to capitalize on the materiality of their medium to turn that into part of the art form, which I think is a really important thing to keep in mind when you're designing for print. You want to kind of make the most of the medium and the format that you're working with. And you can see there's a few other inserts down there that all kind of tie in with the aesthetic. They've got a stripped down color scheme, which is just black, white, and red, which is used quite minimally and quite effectively. So the areas that are red really kind of draw the viewer's eye. You can see on one of the art inserts underneath, in the left underneath the front cover, that there's two corresponding red dots which match up with the red dots on the artwork on the front, but it's not actually the same piece of artwork. So he's got this kind of these running sort of themes that connect different parts of the design to one another, so that even though they are different images, you can see these visual things that tie them together. And another reason I wanted to use this particular cover as an example is just because of how hugely successful this kind of design scheme was for this record. I would almost guarantee that you've probably seen somebody in the last couple of years walking around on the streets with a t-shirt design from this record cover. It's got the black, they have the black shirt background, and then they have the prints in white and red. They sometimes have these diagonal lines going through the text and little bits of abstract kind of textured imagery. And since this record came out, I've seen dozens of different people wearing this, wearing merchandise designs based on this record cover all over the place. So to me, that's a very sort of straightforward, real world way of measuring how popular and successful a design has been. As if you see people on the street wearing it, it's probably been a popular design. So move on to the next one. So this is the last of the more recent examples I've got here. This is by a different designer. It's the cover for a record called Ammo by Bring Me the Horizon. I think this one came out, yeah, this one came out under 2 years ago. It's 2019, so only a year old. The designer of this one was called Darren Orloff. And what I really think is successful about this cover design is, again, how he has been very conscious of the materials that he's working with. So this was a design made specifically for CD cases. And you can see that they've kind of worked around the materials and the shapes of the CD and the CD packaging in order to make them part of the design. So there's 3 different layers to this design. Firstly, there's a sticker or a print over the sort of outer layer of the jewel case with these red hearts. These are all kind of stuck onto the outside of the CD case. And then underneath is the yellow layer. This is a cardboard insert, which is usually where the lyric book goes, but you can see they've actually cut this one to half the size so that it shows through to the bottom layer, which takes us to the 3rd layer, which is the CD itself. And they've put some very minimal kind of text information on the CD there. But what's interesting about this is by cutting that cardboard insert in half, they've given themselves a 3rd layer of design to work with. And that CD, the sort of being able to visually see the actual CD, turns that CD into part of the cover design, which I think is what makes this a really clever and interesting design to look at. So now going on to a couple of slightly older ones that are also iconic. This is a Stanley Donwood record cover design for an album called Hail to the Thief by Radiohead, which is from the 90s. This is a really interesting album cover in a very different way. Obviously, it's a much more flat image. And this was originally a kind of fine art painting, which is then being translated into a CD cover. But what I find really iconic about this one is the way that it's taken some very simple elements. It's just used bright colors and a mixture of different words, all in different sort of blocks of color. And all those words on their own are quite, they're quite ambiguous. It's not clear exactly what they mean, but the way that he's arranged all these words together and around each other implies connections between them. So when you see certain words next to each other and surrounded by other words, it kind of implies connections and maybe a message that it's trying to send you. And this layer of intrigue is what kind of draws you into the cover design and encourages you to look at it a little bit longer than you might do at a more straightforward and obvious cover design. So for that reason, I think this is a really interesting example of a cover, because it kind of draws you in, kind of encourages you to start thinking about it and making connections between the words yourself, rather than spoon feeding you really obvious information, I suppose. So here is another 90s one, which is the cover to the record Doolittle by Pixies. This was by a designer called Vaughan Oliver, who was kind of part of what's known as the postmodernist design movement. And this is kind of in the 90s sort of grunge, underground, indie music scene. And what I like about this cover is how the art style really perfectly reflects the kind of mood and aesthetic of the music that it's a cover design for. So they were quite a kind of raw underground band, sort of rough around the edges. Their music's sometimes a bit shouty, a bit kind of edgy. I got a little bit of a punk edge in there. And the design has consciously tries to reflect that kind of edge in the music. So you can see the bottom layer of color on this cover is very rough, like it's just been kind of scraped on with a paint roller or something. And then there's prints over the top of that that look kind of collaged together. So everything's a bit handmade looking, a bit sort of DIY, which is kind of reflecting the DIY ethos of a lot of bands in this kind of underground music scene. This is a flat sort of natural brown card cover, and you can see that the way they've made this is either by screen printing or possibly risograph printing different layers of color on top of one another. So that bottom layer of color, the sort of grey-green background, that was probably printed as a separate layer, and then the screen print would have been in the lighter colors after that, on top of that sort of abstract texture. And having these different physical layers of printed ink gives the flat image a much more 3D feel, and gives it a sort of an illusion of depth that makes it look like the image is springing out at you a little bit more than it might do if it was just printed on a CMYK printer, something like that. So for this reason, I think, yeah, there's a few reasons that I think this is a really successful cover design. And again, it's become quite an iconic piece of artwork that you see on a lot of t-shirts and things like that. You even see people wearing t-shirts of this today, which kind of shows the sort of the iconicness of the album itself more than anything, but it also shows that people still love this design and it really is stuck in their memories. So my final example now, before we move on to some more interactive stuff, is the oldest one of the lot. It's Joy Division's Unknown Pleasures. This cover was designed by Peter Saville, who's a really famous cover designer. And what I love about the design of this cover is, well, partly you can see how successful it was, like I was saying about seeing people wearing shirts of things about those other covers. This is one of those images that has just been reproduced ad infinitum, basically. I can guarantee you that if you walk around city streets long enough, you will see someone with a shirt with this design on it. And I think partly why this design has become so iconic is just because it's so simple and so kind of mysterious and ambiguous. So it's just got these kind of radio wave depictions on the front, but it doesn't have any text or anything. So if you just ignore those stickers that are on the picture here, this is because it's a photo of a physical LP, but the cover design itself is just the image in the center. Those stickers aren't part of the main design, so I apologize for those. But yeah, when you would have picked the record up to look at it in the shops when this thing first came out on vinyl, there was no text on the front at all. So you would actually be forced to physically pick up the record and kind of turn it over, maybe pull out the insert to have a look at what the band actually was and what the record was about. And that element of mystery and intrigue can be quite engaging if it's done in the right way. And there's this kind of infographic image in the middle of the cover that implies it has a meaning, but it doesn't tell you what the meaning is. And that kind of draws you in and makes you want to, you know, go, oh, what does this mean? I better kind of like turn the cover over, see what the band is, see if I can figure out what this artwork is about. So yeah, for a variety of reasons, I think this has become a really iconic album cover as well. And the simplicity of it is just all about how it delivers an interesting concept in a very kind of effective, streamlined sort of way. So, just looking at what I'm doing next. So I've just I've gone through all my examples now. I'll just switch my screen share off for a minute. I'm going to have a little look in the chat and see if anybody has put in favorite album covers of theirs.
I've had one sent over to me privately, which is the AM album cover. Or AM album cover.
AM album cover, okay. I'm going to have to quickly Google this. I don't know. Right.
Do let us know if you have any iconic albums that really stand out in your mind, album covers in particular. Do pop them into the chat and do share those with everyone. We'd love to see what you're thinking, what catches your attention.
The AM album cover, this could possibly mean the Arctic Monkeys one.
That may well be, yeah.
Yeah, I will do. I'll do a quick screen share, just show it on my Google Images.
Cool.
This is a pretty iconic looking album cover as well. It's
Graduation by Kanye West as well. That one's really stood out to people.
Oh yeah, that's a good example.
Oh, there's loads that are pouring in.
Yes, this Kanye West one is really kind of bold, bright colours, almost neon, isn't it? It's got the kind of
Abbey Road, that's a classic. That's another one. Black
yeah,
Star
Abbey Road
by
is.
Bowie.
Let's get
Coldplay's Rush of Blood to the Head. That's one of my favourites.
Okay, I'll look at Abbey Road and Rush of Blood to the Head, and then we'll move on. Abbey Road, yeah, this is a real classic, iconic image. So I've just got the kind of rough Google Images tab up here, but yeah, it's such a simple but effective image. How kind of the figures and the way they're walking across kind of corresponds with the lines of the zebra crossing, and it's just kind of yeah, that is a good album cover, and it's one that's been parodied loads of times as well, because it's so iconic and so simple and something that you can recreate just with your friends. I think that is partly what's great about it. Like if you look here, there's an example of somebody set up a big screen with the background so people can take their own photos in front of it, which is great for kind of marketing for the band. So there's all these different pictures of people recreating the album cover. Rush of Blood to the Head.
I think we better, just after this one, better press on a little bit because of time, but these are great. Thank you for sending those over.
Yeah, thanks everyone for sending your recommendations. Sorry we didn't have time to look at very many. This Rush of Blood to the Head cover is really impressive as well, isn't it? It's sort of high tech, but with the kind of degradation of the digital format, which makes it feel kind of a little bit unsettling. It's like it's a almost recognizable image of a person, but something's gone wrong in the process. It's some kind of glitch has gotten into this software and sort of distorted the face into something that is no longer human. There's a little close up of it. That is another, a little bit like the a little bit like the Joy Division cover design in its kind of simple, bold, strong, eye-catching image in the center of a almost blank background, just to really draw attention to the kind of the concept and the image that's going on in the middle there. Yeah, that's another really good example. Okay, right. So now let's move on to actually start doing some interactive stuff with the workshop. Just taking a sip of water. So I'm going to ask you to do a little concept development exercise next, which is called thumbnailing. This is a really popular, really useful tool that is used by a lot of graphic designers, illustrators, even fine artists actually. And it's very simple, but very effective. And basically what it is a kind of visual brainstorming process where you draw as many concepts, as many alternative versions of an idea, or sort of versions of as many different ideas for the project or for the task as you can think of in as short a time as possible. So it's you may have done brainstorming exercises in classes before where you do something like a mind map, where you do like a word in a bubble and then lines with more words that kind of come to mind from that word. It's a little bit like a visual version of that, but you're doing they're called thumbnails because they are sketches that are basically the size of a thumbnail. So you're just doing small, fast, rough sketches just to get ideas down on paper. And then later on, you kind of come back and go over all the things you've got and filter out which are the best ideas that you might want to then develop further and do a few more developed sketches of after that. But during the thumbnailing process itself, the whole idea is to not kind of get hung up on details, not kind of get hung up on whether an idea is going to work or not, because you're only spending literally a few seconds on each drawing and just zooming on to the next one, just getting enough very basic information down onto the paper that you will be able to look back at it and remember what the idea was. That's the main purpose of this kind of exercise. So I'm going to ask you all to pick a record cover that you would like to redesign. So I'd recommend just picking an album that you really enjoy, perhaps, or if you're kind of stuck for ideas, you could always pick just the last record that you were listening to. And you don't even need necessarily to have a reference picture of the original cover if it's just a record that you're familiar with and want to kind of redesign the cover of. Another option as well, if you're stuck for ideas for this, is if you've got your own band, or if some of your friends or something like that have a band that maybe is going to release a record, you could always do a cover for them. It could potentially be like an imaginary record that hasn't been released yet, that you're kind of you kind of like the idea of. But you need the band name and the album title. Those are the main things you need. So I'm just going to walk you through the process a little bit, doing some sketches of my own on camera. You can see I've got my phone camera balanced on a stack of CDs to keeping with the theme of cover design here. So we've got just over 10 minutes. It's not a very long exercise because we've got some other stuff to cover after this. So if you could just start doing your sketches now, and what I want you to do is draw as many different concepts for this same cover as you can possibly think of, and as you can get down on paper within the time as possible. So make the sketches quick and rough. Don't worry about whether the ideas are good or bad, anything like that. I just want you to fill as much space, get as many ideas down as you can within the time limit. So if you all start doing your thumbnail sketches now, I will then start doing my own, and I'll keep talking. I'll kind of walk you through my thought process a little bit as I'm doing it. But yeah, start yours right now as well.
Natty, just to give you a heads up, just for the sake of time, we might need to just shorten this just to around 5 minutes for the thumbnail sketches, but I can I'll keep a timer going so so people can work quickly as you're chatting through.
Okay. Right, so start drawing. I'm going to start drawing too. I'll just show you the design on my, if you look on the phone camera that's looking down on the paper, this is the cover I'm going to redesign. It's a record called Discovering the Waterfront by Silverstein. The reason I've picked it is basically it's a record that meant a lot to me when I was younger. I was a big fan of it, but I was never a huge fan of the cover design. And so I thought it might be an interesting one for me to have a mess around with for this workshop. So what am I going to do? So yeah, when you're doing this, it's good to think about things, things that could feed into the artwork from the subject matter. So think about the title of the record. So Silverstein is Discovering the Waterfront. So I'll just do a quick square here. So something that immediately comes to mind, of course, is waves, the sea, that kind of thing. Also, stuff like the boundary, perhaps, between water and land, because it's the waterfront. It makes you think of things like piers, docks. So there could be some kind of divide here where there's like water one side, land on the other. Maybe a photo this would be. So this is another good tip for thumbnails, is that you don't actually have to draw the detail of the stuff that's going to go into the picture. Sometimes you can just draw a composition and then divide it up into shapes that are roughly the layout that you think the image would be. And then you can just add little notes and labels onto them saying what would go in those shapes. So I could say, here is water. This is, say, a boat, something like that. Super rough, just to kind of get the concepts down on paper to remind yourself when you come back to them later on. Another thing that's quite interesting to think about when you're doing thumbnails and concept development for covers is the content of the music. So it's always great, it's always a really good idea to actually listen to the music if you have it available before you start doing designs, because it makes a lot of sense to try and make the cover design directly relevant to the music. So you could perhaps find some content in the lyrics or some sort of imagery that they use in the lyrics or in one of the song names, something like that. And then you could translate that into imagery on the record cover. So say if the band had a song about sailing away, just kind of springboarding off the Silverstein waterfront thing. So say if one of their songs was about a boat sailing away to sea, you could use a boat somewhere in the record cover, and the boat wouldn't be in the album name, but if somebody then listened to the song on the record, they would think like, right, that explains why the boat is on the album cover. So little conceptual ties to the music are always a good idea to think about. You can also think about the sort of aesthetic that the band has. So for example, one that springs to mind is somebody like Marilyn Manson, because they have a really strong kind of dark gothic aesthetic, and the aesthetic in some bands is actually as important as the music, sometimes even more important for some artists. So it's always good to keep that kind of thing in mind. And if they've got a really strong aesthetic leaning towards a certain style, it makes sense to kind of put that theme into your cover design. So for example, if it's a really dark gothic aesthetic and the bands only ever wear black and white clothes, you might want to design the cover design in only black and white to match the kind of on-stage appearance that the band have. That kind of thing is always interesting to keep in mind as well. And if you get stuck for ideas, it's also handy just to kind of go and dig into the background of the music and the band to generate a few concepts like this. It can be a good way of getting over a creative block if you've got one as well. So yeah, I'm lost track of just how long have we had for the thumbnail drawing now, Tom? Sorry.
We've had 4 minutes and 39 seconds so far.
Okay, cool. So we've got a little bit more time on this, but we've almost run out of time. So just draw one or two more concepts if you can. What's also really important to be aware of in the thumbnailing process is that forcing yourself to do as many drawings as you can. Part of the idea of this is to push yourself out of the creative comfort zone, because the first maybe 3 or 4 design ideas that will spring to mind are usually the easiest. They're the ones that are coming from the nearest to the sort of surface level of your mind. But once you push through that and get into the more difficult zone where you're thinking, I've run out of ideas, but then you force yourself to keep kind of keep digging deeper into your mind and into your kind of subconscious, digging deeper into the subject matter, it's often once you've pushed past that hurdle and started producing more ideas that you never would have thought of coming to mind until they actually happened. That's often the time when you come up with some of the most interesting and some of the most creative ideas. The first handful of ideas that come to mind, sometimes one of those is the best, but a lot of the time you can dig deeper and you can find something that's a little bit more kind of out there, a little bit more original. So when you finish the drawing that you're on, I'd now like to ask you to just take a photo of your favorite thumbnail sketch that you've managed to come up with. Just a phone photo, doesn't have to be good quality. And then if you can send that over to your computer, if you're on a computer for this workshop, I basically want you to be able to send the image to yourself to use in Photoshop when you set up a document as a kind of base layer for the next exercise. I'm just gonna switch my phone video off for now. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to get those photos taken and send them to yourselves before we transition over into the next exercise. I'll just talk a tiny bit more about kind of the general concept of designing covers and thumbnailing, to give you a bit of time to do those photos. So another really important aspect to keep in mind when you're designing concepts for album covers is how text and image interact with one another on the cover design. This really is one of the elements of cover design that I find the most interesting, because it kind of brings together graphic design and illustration. If you've got a record cover that is purely an image, it's very illustrative, really. It's quite illustration focused, and the same is true the other way around. If you have a record cover that is just text typography, it is basically pure graphic design. But the majority of album covers do kind of have a combination of the illustrative element and the design element with the typography. Sometimes they have illustration with other design sort of techniques applied as well as typography. And that's partly why it's a really interesting medium. It's because it is both graphic design and illustration at the same time. And it's really important to think about the way your text interacts with your images. So the choice of typefaces for a start is a really important one, because if you have, say, a really serious record cover, maybe you've got your kind of dark gothic artist that we're talking about as an example, but then you put a really light-hearted looking font on there, like if you used Comic Sans, for example, the typeface that everybody loves to hate. It's a very kind of jokey, kind of light-hearted feeling typeface. So if you use that particular typeface in combination with dark, serious images, it would feel a bit like the record cover was a joke, which is great if that's what you're trying to do, but most likely you probably want a typeface that kind of matches that aesthetic and has a bit of a kind of gothic or at least a kind of serious edge to it. So the way that typography interacts with the images is a huge aspect of what makes good or bad cover design, I think. So hopefully you will just about have had enough time to transfer those images over to your computer. I'm just gonna get my screen up for screen sharing again.
At this stage, I'm just going to remind people, if you are struggling to upload your image, which we'll be working on in Photoshop shortly, you can take the recording and pause this video and then do it alongside Natty that way. It might be worth, if you're going to struggle to keep up at any point, it might be worth just watching Natty, just enjoying what he's explaining, and then coming back to that in your own time as well. So don't feel under pressure as you engage with the workshop.
Great, thanks, Tom. Okay, so I am going to start the next stage of the workshop now. Yeah, like Tom said, if you've got your images ready, that's great. But if you haven't, just follow along with the rest. It's not essential to the workshop, and you can kind of watch this as a tutorial video as well. So I want you to open up Photoshop, go to File and New. The File tab is, at least on a Mac, it's up at the top left of your screen.
You're right to share your screen with us as well.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought I pressed it. Let me start that again.
Okay.
I must have...
That's all right.
Must have clicked off.
Right, we can see it. It's in front of us now.
Excellent, right. Okay, so here's Photoshop. Ignore the picture I've got up here now. I'm going to come back to that in a bit. So File, New. You can see it's at the top left of my screen. It may be a little bit different on Windows, but it should be pretty similar. So now it brings up this window for new document settings. It gives you all these options here, like a recent photo, print, stuff like that. But if you're doing your own custom measurements, it doesn't really matter that much anyway, because you can just put it in by hand, which is what I'm going to ask you to do. So it's on millimeters here, but if I put it to inches, you can see I can set that to 12 quite easily. That's the size of a vinyl record cover. So that's a good kind of standard measurement to work to when you're designing album covers. That's the biggest version that the album cover might potentially be printed in. So you want to be prepared for the maximum size that it might be made in, because you never know. You know, even if a record cover is being designed only to go online or to be on a CD or something, if that record is more successful than expected down the line, there's always a chance that it might actually get a vinyl pressing. So my philosophy is always be prepared in advance for that kind of possibility by designing things to a higher quality so that it can be scaled down. It's always good to have a higher quality level than you need and scale it down than to have too low quality and then be unable to scale it up. Because if you scale up something smaller, it will get pixelated and look grainy and a bit low quality. So really you always want more quality than you need, just so that you're always safe, you're always prepared. So you can set that to 12 inches on this little drop down here, but then you can change it back to millimeters as well, which is quite handy. So you can see that in millimeters, 12 inches is 304.8. So I'm just going to change the width and the height both to 304.8. But actually, I'm not going to leave it at 304.8. And that is because of a thing called bleed, which is quite important to remember if you're designing things for print. What it means, essentially, what bleed means as a design term is a couple of millimeters extra that you add to all the sides of your image, so that if it's printed and it's going to be cut down to the edge of the paper, you have that few extra millimeters to play with, so that the printer can actually cut through the extra printed part of the image so that it goes right to the edge of the paper. So talking about that Silverstein record that I was showing you earlier, if I hold the booklet of that up to the camera, is a really good example of full bleed printing. You can see the picture goes right to the very edge of the paper there. And that would not be achievable if they hadn't used bleed, because if there was no bleed, your artwork would just stop. Your artwork would stop at the edge of the artwork that you wanted people to actually see. So if you then cut down into that artwork, you'd lose some of the stuff that you wanted to actually be there. So having those extra couple of millimeters is very important if you're getting stuff made for print. So as a rule of thumb, usually about 3 millimeters on each side is what people use. So for the width, you want to add 6 millimeters because that's 3 for either side. So we're going to have 310.8 rather than 304.8 millimeters. And that will be the same on the height as well. And just before we finish starting the document, you can see there's this resolution option here, which is pixels per inch. I always set mine to 600. That basically means the number of pixels within the inch of your design on screen. So the lower it is, the lower resolution your picture will be, the more pixelated it will be. A good rule of thumb is to have a minimum of 300 if things are being designed for print. But again, I just believe that it's worth having that extra bit of quality to play with that you can then scale down later if necessary. So I'd recommend doing 600 pixels per inch, just so we have a really, really high quality image that will be very versatile down the line. And you can select your color mode here. If you're designing it for print, it might be wise to do some design in CMYK color, because a lot of printers do use CMYK. That's kind of the standard digital printing format. So looking at your design in CMYK is quite handy to see, because it gives you a bit of a closer representation to what the design will actually look like in print. But it's up to you. You can design in RGB. That gives you more of a full color spectrum on the computer. You just have to remember that you might need to change your color settings later on in order to fit the printing medium you're using.
Natty, is it at all possible to zoom in your screen because obviously some people are watching this and the video, and they're working alongside the video, and
Yes.
the video, the little icons and things are quite small. Is there any possibility of zooming in? If there isn't, then it might be something that we have to recommend watching on the recording, but it might help people if it is possible.
I'm afraid I don't know a way to do it myself. I could look it up, but I'd have to kind of spend a couple of minutes trying to figure it out.
Well, unfortunately, I have to leave that for now, but it might be something that people might want to come back to and watch the recording to be able to see the icons. But of course, Natty's going to be talking through which icons he's going to be using for the workshop. So apologies if that is an issue for people.
Yeah, sorry about that, everyone. If you can't see the screen clearly enough. Yes, hopefully if you watched back through it in the recording, at least you'll be able to see it a little bit more in detail. But I will talk through all the things I'm doing as well, so hopefully you'll be able to follow the audio cues as well. So once you set up your document with those settings, just click that create button in the bottom right of the pop-up window, and it will create your document. You can see mine here is a white square. And another thing that is good to do when you're setting up a document like this is to add what's called a guide layout. These are just lines that divide your image into segments so that you can kind of see the way the composition is laid out. So the way to put a guide layout onto your document is go to this menu tab at the top where file and stuff is. There's a drop down menu that's called view. Click on the view menu, go down quite near the bottom, and you'll see new guide layout as one of the options here. So click on view, new guide layout, and you can see on my screen that it's brought up the pop-up window, but it's automatically giving me a little preview of how these guides work as well. So what I want you to do is roughly what I've already got here automatically, but your Photoshop might automatically put something else in. So I want you to go on columns, set it to 3 columns, 3 rows, and then it gives you this option at the bottom here with margins as well. I'd say just don't put margins in right now. Don't need to think about those. So we just want a nice, simple grid of 3 columns and 3 rows as a guide layout. Press OK, and there are your guides on the screen. And what this is useful for is seeing the kind of composition of your design in terms of the rule of thirds. So the rule of thirds is quite a handy kind of art concept to keep in mind. And it's basically the idea that a lot of the time composition feels more natural and more comfortable if the sections of an image are divided into thirds, both horizontally and vertically. So say, for example, you had 2 figures on you wanted to have 2 figures on your cover and you weren't sure exactly where to put them. Having this guide layout can help you guide yourself as to where to put those. So I'm just going to do a very quick sketch here of a stick figure, and you can see that I'm following the line of this guide out here. So I've put one there and one there. So they're kind of on the lines of the thirds. And they kind of feel sort of roughly harmonious in the composition of where they are on screen. But if you've got things like photography and text and things like that, it can be quite useful to have your text sort of following along the lines of some of these divides, or alternatively, sitting comfortably in the middle of one of those square sections is another way to place images. You definitely don't have to follow these guides to the letter though. You can kind of just use them as a rough guideline of where things should go. And you can toggle them on and off quite easily as well. If you're on a Mac, if you hold down the Command button next to the space bar and then press colon, you can see they just disappear. And then if you do it again, they reappear. If you're doing it on a Windows, you can do it with Control and colon, and it should be exactly the same thing. So you can quickly toggle those guides on and off so that you can see your art with and without them. You can just switch them on and off for quick reference material there.
So I'm just going to interject just for a moment to allow people to catch up, but also just to say we do realise that the workshop has got to that 12 o'clock stage now. So some of you will have booked out time especially for this workshop, and thank you for joining us. And if you need to head off, we totally understand. That's not rude at all. But we will be recording this workshop. So if you do need to slope off now, then that's fine. We will be sending you the recording. But Natty's going to carry on for a few more minutes at least. Okay?
Thank you. Yeah, so that's the kind of the basic setup we've got covered over here. Apologies, I'm running a little bit over time. So if you've got your picture ready, I want you to just paste that into Photoshop. If you get it up on your Finder window like I have here, you can just click and drag it into the document as I'm doing here, which is a really simple and quick way of doing things. But if you're unable to do that, another way to do it is go on Photoshop, do File, then Import, then, you can do File, Import, Image, I believe, and then you can choose the image from your documents. So I've just got a thumbnail that I already had done here. I'm just going to resize it quickly. You can resize things quickly by pressing Command then T and dragging them like this, but don't worry if I'm going a little bit too fast with this for you to follow, because this isn't one of the essential things that I'm asking you to follow along with. So if you just kind of get your thumbnail cover design in the center there, it's a good kind of background layer that you can then build upon with your design. So you're not going to have time to sort of do a proper design in the space of this workshop, but I'll just very, very quickly go over a couple of the basic functions so you've got the facilities to start messing around with stuff. So one of the first things to learn about on here is layers. There's a little panel in the bottom right of the Photoshop window down there, and you can see there's, or at least on mine, there's the background layer, and then there's the image I just pasted in. There's a little button at the bottom of this panel, which is a plus sign inside a square. If you click on that, it will create a new layer. And what I want you to do is create a new layer using that, and then go on the brush tool, which is on the far left tab here. You can see I'm wiggling my mouse around it, hopefully. And this just brings up a very basic paintbrush, which is super simple to use. There's a little number in the top left of your screen next to the brush icon, where if you click on it, you can sort of set the brush size here, the pixel size of the brush and different textures of it. Don't worry about all that stuff right now because it takes too long to go into, but just set the brush size to something fairly chunky that you can see easily. Set mine to about 60. And then you can just use your brush on the screen like this. So what you can do to sort of start very basically digitizing your design is trace around some of the elements on your thumbnail, and these will be on a new layer. So if you go back to the layer tab, you can see there's a little eye next to the layers you've got on there, and if you click the eye, it toggles the layer on and off. So you can see that this paintbrush stuff I'm doing is completely separate to the picture below. This is called non-destructive editing, because you're kind of adding things in separate layers on top of each other. And what's great about this is that they can then be edited separately to one another without kind of damaging the original picture. So destructive editing would be, say, if I was to then do some more drawing, but I kept it on the same layer as this. If I did this red line through the head here, the problem with it being on the same layer is that the red has now completely overwritten the black. So if I later on wanted to move this red line, say, and I tried to move it around, it's all one object and the red is permanently overwritten onto the black. So this is where layers can be really handy. It makes it easier to go back and change things further down the line in the design process. And it sort of preserves a lot of your images if that's what you want to do. So those are some of the most basic functions. I'll show you one more basic function before we move on, which is the text tool. That's on the same panel on the left as the brush tool. It should be a T. I'm just wiggling my mouse around it there, so hopefully you can see. And this is a pretty simple tool to use. One way you can use it is to just click on the tool and then click somewhere on your screen, and it will automatically put some sort of some random text into there. So if you can just type something on your keyboard like that, and you can see when you're on the text tool, the options for it come up here at the top. So it's a very small point size right now, it's 12. So if I move this up to 72, it'll be much easier for you to see on your screens. And there are also text settings on the right-hand side, just above your layers panel. You can see there's a little tab that says properties here, and there's a little chunk here that says color, and you can see that it's the same red as the text. So a way to quickly change the color of your text is to just click on that and then choose another color like this with these color pickers, and you can just mess around with those. So that's a really good thing to know as a basic introduction. And another way to do the text tool is, instead of just clicking on your page, you can click and drag a box, and then it makes a text box of a certain size. So it makes it a little bit more bespoke to the sort of size and shape you wanted it to be. And then you can then go into the text by clicking with the text tool and make more specific changes with either the tabs at the top or the right-hand side. So, Tom, do I have time to go into the unpacking of my own process a little bit, or?
Yeah, I think it would be really lovely to see some of your developed work and see some of those more advanced things that you look at. So I think that would be really lovely. But if people need to log out because they're busy, that we completely understand. And please do watch the recording at a time that's convenient for you.
Okay, great, thank you. So yeah, now I'm going to transition into a kind of third and final stage of the workshop. I do apologize again that I've run over. It's very easy to get kind of sucked into too much detail with this stuff when there's so much you can talk about and experiment with in this field. So I'm going to stop asking you to try and follow along with the instructions now, because I'm going to go and show you a little bit of the process of a finished designed document of my own. So it will be too fast for you to be able to try and follow along with these steps, because it's work that I've already finished. So please just see this as a kind of sort of tutorial video for you to watch and enjoy. And you can try out these processes later, but I don't expect anyone to be able to follow along with it as I'm describing it. So I'll just close this document. So there's two different versions of this document that I'm going to show you. First off, I'll show you this, this earlier version of it. This is a record cover design that I actually made myself. It was a commission for 4 bands. It was a split 12-inch LP between 4 different sort of DIY hardcore bands, and they commissioned me to design this as a 12-inch vinyl cover for them. So first of all, this is just the art document. This is the version of the design that is just purely the kind of artwork and design. The second version is the template for printing, which I will show you briefly afterwards. And I'll show you a couple of little things that I did, little processes that are part of the way this design was kind of constructed. You can see it's a very abstract piece of artwork, and that is kind of one of the things that I most enjoy doing as my own creative process. You may also notice that it's twice the width of a record cover, and that's just because it's the front and back cover combined into one document. So you can see I've got a grey box here that I switched on and off just to give myself a visual reminder of where the divide of the middle or the spine of the record was going to be. So there's a few different tools I've used here. You can see the text is pretty self-explanatory. I've used the text tool, and there's a few text layers here. If you look in my layers panel, the text layers are named with the text that is in them, so you can see the band names there. I did some lines and boxes. There's line and box tools on Photoshop that you can have a play around with to do that kind of stuff. So those are really simple elements. But then the artwork itself is a kind of combination of analog and digital. So it started off with a physical painting that I scanned into the computer. Oh yeah, as a brief side note, it's really handy to have access to a scanner if you want to use physical artwork in your digital designs, because it gives you that perfect flat representation of your physical image. You can get good photos of artwork that you can then use in design, but if you have access to a scanner, it's much easier and more efficient to use one of those. So I highly recommend one of those if you want to get more seriously into design and illustration that uses things like Photoshop. So my bottom layer of artwork here, I'm just going to make a couple of things invisible. My bottom layer of artwork, you can see the actual color of the original painting was completely different to what it ended up being in the final design. So this is my scanned piece of physical painting. It was actually quite a small piece of painting, and I got these ripples just by kind of putting a piece of paper on and pulling it off, and it created these interesting kind of branches. And then scanning it at a really high resolution and showing this kind of macro version of the painting, it gives it an almost sort of microscopic organism kind of look, which I really liked. And then to experiment with the colors and try and kind of create a more unified color scheme, I did a few tricks. Like I copied this same picture and pasted it on top of itself and did these extra layers that I then changed the color settings of. You can do things like you can change blending modes on your layers here, which is just a drop down tab here, and it's something you can just experiment with. You can see my Photoshop is giving me previews of the different blending modes here. And these are ways that your layers interact with each other. So the colors of the layers interact differently with one another if you use these blending modes, and it kind of does all kinds of weird and wacky effects that are really quite fun to play with, especially if you're doing an abstract design. So I made a couple of different layers of the artwork. You can see this layer, but I've just toggled on and off, the orange one. I kind of gave it an orange color overlay. So this is another thing you can do. If you double click on the little thumbnail of the layer on the panel here, it brings up the layer styles and blending options window here. And you can do things like color overlay here, and you can just choose a color, any color you want, and then choose the blending mode as well. So you can put any of those weird blending options I was just looking at in there, or you can just have it as a normal kind of flat color that goes over the image. And then, yeah, you can see it completely changes the look of your artwork there. Multiply is quite a good one for kind of giving a tint to the overall image while keeping the detail of the image. So I put I put a orange color overlay over this version of it. I also used a thing called a layer mask. You can see it's on the right hand side there. And layer masks are ways of making part of your image transparent. It's kind of like rubbing part of your image out but in a non-destructive way. So it's a layer mask that you kind of add onto your image, then use a brush tool or something like that, or a gradient tool to make some of your image transparent, but without actually deleting the image. So it's something that you can come back and edit later rather than destroying your artwork. So I used a couple of these effects on here. And then there's yet another effect on this layer, which is purple paper. You can see if I just change its blending mode back to normal, it's a solid texture of some kind of worn, weathered old paper, which I've then used a bright purple color overlay on. And then I've used blending options. I've used screen. Screen is quite an interesting blending option that kind of gives this this sort of texture effect that goes over the top of whatever images you have, but without kind of really overpowering those images. And what screen is really handy for is for making it look as if your images are printed onto the texture that you've screened over them. So you can see it now looks as if this abstract paint is on this kind of old weathered paper. Here's a good section of it for an example of how that's working there. So yeah, there's all kinds of weird and wacky effects like these that you can play around with to make some really interesting artwork that looks absolutely nothing like the original content you started with. Oh yeah, I've got another layer here, which is the ink splatter. That was another analog thing that I scanned in, and then I cut it out with the magic wand selection tool so that it was just a black ink splatter on a transparent background. And having objects cut out like this in Photoshop is great because it means you can move them around. Oops. It means you can move them around on your image and they don't kind of project any sort of black or white background onto the stuff behind. So it really looks like it's part of the same image as whatever you have underneath. So lots of little tricks and things like that that are worth messing around with. So just before I finish this little rundown of my design process, I'll show you also the template for the actual printing of the record. So if you're going to get a commission to do a project like this, the printers you're going to work with usually have their own templates that they want you to use. So there's not one universal printing template for the most part. Usually a printer will have a certain document that they want you to design your work in. So you can see that I've applied this template to my artwork. This yellow band around the edge, this marks the 3mm bleed area that we were talking about near the start of the workshop. So I had to make extra sure that none of the important information in my artwork went into this yellow area, because you basically have to assume that this yellow area might get chopped off and people won't see it. So you want to keep text well away from the yellow or any kind of really important image. You do not want to be touching the bleed area at all. And this red band within the yellow one, this actually marks folded areas. So the way a vinyl record sleeve is constructed is on the front, the image is printed, it's cut a little bit wider, and then the edges are folded in. So they fold back and are glued to the inside of the back cover. So this little red area is actually part of the design that will be physically folded over, so that again it gets that full bleed effect, so you can see the artwork actually goes all the way around the corner and you don't see a single bit of white on that record sleeve. You can actually see here I made a little mistake in my design process and had to find a workaround where I had a bit of the artwork here that didn't extend far enough down. But thankfully it was big enough to sort of it filled the safe area at least. And my workaround here was to just stretch this little bottom bit a little bit into the fold and cropping areas. But because that red zone is actually going to be folded onto the inside of the back cover, nobody's actually going to see that I made this mistake here. So the design itself was sort of safe for production, but that's a little workaround I had to do when I accidentally made part of my image a little bit too small. You can see here this red vertical part is the spine as well. And on vinyl records, the spine is very, very thin compared to the sort of the width of the cover design on the front, because it's a large thin disc. So on a CD, you'd have proportionately a much larger space to design on your spine. So I'm going to hold a CD up to the camera for comparison. You can see on the Silverstein one, they've had a lot more space to play with proportionally than you do on a vinyl record. So that is something that changes depending on your medium. And you can see here that I had such a thin area that all I could really do on here was just squeeze in the text as sort of simply and clearly as I could and put that underneath that red band. And then there's the track list on the back here. And I also had to add these logos of the record labels that were producing the record. So you'll probably also have to put in little technical details like that. You might have to put things like barcodes, serial numbers, whatever information your client asks you to put on there. You'll have to remember that you'll have to find places to put all that kind of stuff as well, depending on the project. So yeah, that's a quick rundown of roughly my own sort of Photoshop design process for album covers. I hope most of it made sense. Yeah, I didn't have time to sort of go into a huge amount of depth with it, but there's just so many things that you can talk about in this.
Natty, thank you so much. That's been really insightful, and I hope that people found that really, really useful. I'm just going to kind of round things up a little bit now, and we'll have a bit of time for question at the end. But I'm just going to remind you of a few things before you maybe head out. So there's a few more workshops that you might want to get involved in as part of the summer school workshop series. We have a couple coming up in screenwriting as well as acting. So it might attract different types of people. It might be that you tell your friends or family members about that, but we'd love to engage with you again next week in those workshops. Also, all of the other workshops that we've been doing, things like the ethical textiles, as well as other ones of my favorites like the expressive painting workshop. You can actually watch those again. We're going to be sending out a link of all of those workshops, so you might be able to want to get involved with those. What else can I tell you? So we will be sending out a link of those things, as I mentioned. A few more notes here. We're also offering the opportunity for you to have a certificate as well. This is going to be really useful for students that are in like year 12 that are interested in applying to an arts university. Just to show that you've engaged with these type of experiences is going to be really useful on your personal statement. So if you'd like to receive a certificate, all you need to do is to attend 6 workshops or watch them back, and then submit work to us from 3 of those workshops. And that work needs to be submitted to us at student.recruitment@nua.ac.uk. And Gavin, if you're in the background there, if you could pop that into the chat so people know where to send the work, that would be fantastic. Other than that, right, a few more things to note. You can also send over your work for us to post up on Instagram. Our hashtag is @NUA Outreach, and if you'd like to showcase your work to us on Instagram, we'd love to share it as well, so that would be awesome if you want to share it there.